Du lytter til beAwesome podcast. beAwesome.dk er et community og en platform, der giver dig muligheden for at yde det ekstra hver dag, for at vide mere, ville mere, kunne mere og derved være mere. I dag har vi Aaron Olsen fra paleorunner.org med som gæst. Aaron han har haft gæster i sit podcast med, og det er nogle af de største navne, der har været der inden for løb, paleo, sportsvidenskab og meget mere. Interviewet foregår selvfølgelig på engelsk. You're listening to beAwesome podcast. beAwesome.dk is a Danish website and a community and a platform providing training advice, fitness advice and personal training. It is also a podcast and a base for a lot of articles about training, paleo and a lot of other things.
All right, I'd like to welcome you, Aaron, to the show. I'm going all English here since hopefully our listeners and viewers can actually understand that. But first of all, let me start out by saying that I am very pleased to have you on your show. I listen to your podcast a lot. And actually, maybe you should just introduce yourself. Besides running paleorunner.org, what do you like? What do you do in relation to paleo and training and all that?
Yeah. Well, it's great to be on the show. It's pretty exciting to be here, and I'm glad you guys are starting a podcast. It's a lot of fun. But basically, I run a blog called paleorunner.org, and I've been doing that for the past probably about the past year. And I've been a runner since high school, since I was around 15 or 16, and I've struggled with injuries and things like that, and I've also struggled with, since junior high, irritable bowel syndrome, which is a pretty bad thing to have if you're a runner. And I was just reading Tim Noakes' book, The Lore of Running, the other night, and about 60% of runners at some point will struggle with gastrointestinal problems. And I just struggled that anytime I'd go more than an hour, I would always have to stop and find somewhere to use the bathroom. And I thought, finally, I'm going to figure this out and figure out what's going wrong with my digestion. And I heard about the paleo diet. I had first gone to a doctor, and he said, well, you need to eat more whole grains because you need more fiber. So I tried that, and that just made the problem worse. So I started looking for other alternatives, and I found this thing called the paleo diet, and I was like, well, how's that going to work with my running? I mean, I'm not going to have any carbohydrates. How am I going to fuel my training? What's that going to be like? And I tried out the paleo diet. I said, you know what, I'm just going to try it out. And it worked wonders. I felt it was like basically a life changer for me. I felt like I had a lot more energy, but the main thing was my digestion was so much better. I didn't have to worry about finding a porta potty on the middle of a 20-mile run. I had normal digestion, and that was amazing for me. I just couldn't believe it. And I started the blog and podcast just to kind of explore more of these ideas behind the paleo diet and what was actually going on. And it's just been a fun way for me to kind of share my journey with others.
In regards to, I read on your website that minimalist running and minimalist training, also the footwear, sort of came at the same time as that. Is that the case?
Yeah, that is the case. You know, I also struggled with injuries over the years. In high school, I struggled to break 19 minutes for the 5K. I was always getting injured, and I just thought if I could just get my training up to, something like the elite runners do, like 50, 60, 70 miles a week, if I could just get there, I know I could break 19 minutes. And I kept trying to get my volume up higher and higher. And I would end up injured. I got stress fractures, knee pain, IT band syndrome, Achilles tendonitis. And finally, after a while, I just kind of gave up on running, but I started to get that itch to kind of go back to running and see what I could do. And I thought, I'm going to take a different approach. And in the same way that I did with my diet, I kind of went back to the basics. I thought,
Can you say what your inspiration for that direction? Can you involve that at all?
Well, the inspiration was just the fact that I wanted to try running without getting injured. I was wondering if it was possible, because every time I up my training volume, I would end up with some sort of injury. So I thought there's got to be a different way. I started searching online, and I really couldn't find much, but I thought, well, I'm just going to train in a way that makes my body feel good, that makes me feel good, makes me happy. And basically that was just running very hard 1 or 2 days a week, really stressing my body, and then giving it plenty of recovery. And on the other days, I would do some walking or light jogging, and just kind of listening to my body. And versus the old days where I would just push, and whether I was tired or not, I would go out for the same run, whatever was on my schedule. And so this new way, I was really looking for the minimum effective dose of what was the minimum I could get away with. Instead of seeing what the maximum I could do, I was finding what the minimum was. And I actually, after about 6 months of training like that, just kind of listening to my body, I was actually able to set some PRs. I ran a pretty fast 10 mile, faster than I had ever run. I set a PR in the 5K, 16:37. I ran a half marathon in 1:17, and I was like, wow, there's something to this, kind of just listening to my body. And so that's another part of the journey that I've been trying to share as well.
Yeah, can you, just for the people who aren't so used to like numbers and running in terms of how fast that is, can you explain how fast 25?
16:37 5K. So that's around 5. Well, we use miles over here, so that's a 5 minute and 20-second mile for 3.1 miles. As far as half marathon, that was a little bit under a 6-minute mile pace. And prior to training this way, I had done a 1:18, so I had taken about a minute off, which it's not huge, but considering the fact the way I was training was only about 25 miles a week versus the 50 to 60 miles a week that I had been doing in the past, it was a huge improvement for me. And I've also been able to stay injury free, and that was a big thing for me. So in the past couple of years, I've improved my digestion and improved my training while getting slightly faster. So that's just a big thing that I want to put out there to other runners who are looking for a way to train without getting injured, or who are maybe having some digestive issues, or just who want to feel better overall. I mean, the paleo diet, moving to a more paleo style diet, has really improved my energy levels as well.
How do you, if you look at the paleo community overall, how do you see that having evolved? And they're starting to be, like, at least here in Denmark, we're hearing some people starting to criticize it as just a cult. You also had someone on your show, Matt Fitzgerald, I think it was.
Yeah. Well, you know, Matt, he wrote a book called Diet Cults, and he has a chapter in there devoted to the paleo diet and how a lot of concepts of the paleo diet are bogus. But he sees things, I think, as a little more black and white, where you're either 100% paleo, where you're going back to the old days of running around with a spear, or you're not. And I see it a little bit more gray, where I try to align my diet more of what I think of as biologically appropriate. And one of the things that I ended up cutting out was whole grains. We've been taught for a long time that whole grains are really beneficial for runners, and they're the best thing that you could eat. But what I started doing is replacing some of those whole grains with a little bit more traditional animal fats and also some starchy tubers. So a lot of grains contain things called anti-nutrients, which kind of mess up your gut. Grains have evolved to protect themselves because of their seeds, and they want to spread their seeds so that they can evolve more and have pass on their DNA. So they basically mess up a lot of people's guts so that their seeds can be passed on. And when we eat those things, a lot of people experience troubles, as I did.
How do you, because what happens with these things a lot is that something convinces you, at least partly, to start that journey. And for me, it was Lieberman, among other things, that really convinced me. But, like, is it the hard science? What convinced you?
Well, the thing that convinced me was mostly personal experience, but then I started looking into the science a little more and trying to figure out what was actually going on. And yeah, the studies that Lieberman has done on the minimalist running and how our foot is this amazing organism that has evolved over millions of years, and that we really don't need a lot of extra support or even a lot of extra cushioning And sometimes those things that we put in there, like support and cushion, can actually have detrimental effects. And so that kind of sent me on a spiral of thinking about things in a different way. And as far as diet is concerned, sometimes we add a lot of things in our modern diet that might not be beneficial or might not have a lot of science to it, just like adding cushioning to a running shoe isn't necessarily beneficial. So for me, it's that evolutionary approach, in that if people have been eating something for a long, long time, it's probably okay to eat. But when you take a look at something like grains, they've only been around for around 10,000 years. And so they're relatively recent to the human biology. And there's growing evidence that things, especially like gluten, can be harmful for humans. And so obviously it's hard to know for sure whether the things you're doing are just a placebo effect or if they're real. But when you experience positive results, it makes you think that there might be something to it.
Yeah, I really understand. It's also what we're seeing here in Denmark. What I understand is happening a lot of in Western countries, also in the US. You can correct me if I'm wrong there. Is that some of the science behind, for example, fat being bad for you is starting to be like, people are starting to see that's actually not existent to a large extent. Is that also happening over there?
Not as much. More and more studies are coming out. I think just a few weeks ago there was a study taking a meta-analysis of all the different studies on saturated fat and finding out that there really wasn't a problem with saturated fat, and that came out in a prestigious medical journal. So things like that are starting to come out more and more, but I think the mainstream really hasn't latched onto it. Like the nutritionists over here, they're still preaching that you never want to go over 30% fat of your total intake. And a lot of people on the paleo diet are eating upwards of 50 to 60% fat, and yet they have extremely robust health, and things like heart disease markers are dropping. So it's really a paradox. If you should never go above 30%, how are so many people experiencing positive benefits from a paleo style diet with higher fat? So it's still quite we're still in the low fat paradigm over here, but it's starting to change very slowly.
Yeah, and you have the advice from a government organization over there as well, giving you like these what you should eat and all that. Yeah. And you still have no one preaching low carbs over there. We don't hear either. It's just starting to. It was on national television the other day, which is a big win for people who believe in that kind of stuff. Of course. Yeah, it's a alternative journalist who went and did that, but it's pretty big.
Okay. Yeah, there is one guy over here. His name's Dr. Oz, and he puts on a health TV show 5 days a week. And in the past year, he's been having more and more people come on his show that are supportive of the higher fat diet. He recently had a guy that you might be interested in having on your show. His name's Peter Attia, and he follows a very high fat diet. And he basically had followed the low-fat guidelines that are put forth in the U.S. food pyramid for a long time, and he just kept getting fatter and fatter and fatter, even though he was exercising a couple hours a day on his bicycle. But when he switched over to the high-fat diet, his weight just started to fall off, and his cycling got better. So he was on the show talking about how saturated fat is a great thing. It helps satiate your hunger. As far as runners, there's even been studies showing that runners who eat more saturated fat actually have less injuries. So there might be something going on with the cells, creating better cells. So yeah, it's still an alternative theory at this point, but there is more and more mainstream things starting to creep through the cracks.
Yeah. How now that we're on the mainstream, what happened recently is the Lieberman settlement. Oh yeah. One that I sadly, every media here at least misrepresented that case and what it meant and what was behind it. Can you talk a little bit about that, perhaps?
Yeah, that was interesting. I mean, they basically were sued because people who started wearing the shoes were getting injured, and they thought that they were putting on these shoes to make their feet stronger and healthier, and lo and behold, they would get some injuries. And I don't know, that seems kind of ridiculous to me. I mean, it's like blaming the human foot for not functioning correctly. But, if you've been in a regular shoe with a 2-inch heel for all your life, and all of a sudden you switch to something that's more biologically appropriate, I would say, something more like a barefoot style shoe. There's probably going to be a transition period where you might be more likely to get injured. It's just like anything. The human body can adapt, but if you go too fast, you can experience problems. And when I first tried the Vibrams, I actually had a foot problem where there's nerves in the balls of your feet called neuromas, and they can get inflamed if you do too much at once. And since there's hardly any cushioning in the Vibrams, I had inflamed one of those nerves, and I had to take about a week off and just kind of let it settle down. So I can understand how people would get injured if they go to those shoes, but the long-term benefits for me were just so much greater. It really helped me to hone in on proper running form. And it's just, for me, it made running so much more fun when I switched to the Vibrams. It felt so much more natural, and for me, it's not necessarily about going faster. It's about having more fun while I'm running and feeling just the way that I feel when I'm running. It's more fun to run in the Vibrams. I can't explain it. I guess you'd have to try it for yourself. But have you had that same experience with wearing Vibrams?
Completely. I had fallen arches before. I was in the military for 6 years, and boots completely ruined my feet. Actually, I could not walk sometimes. I actually had to take my feet up, and I went to a physiotherapist, and he of course gave me all these things to help me, but it basically made me handicapped to an extent, right? But then someday I just thought, this can't be for real. I can't wear fancy shoes. I can't do anything. Running actually wasn't that big a problem, but just walking around for half of what you do for your day, standing up if you want to do that at your desk or something like that. And then what happened was I went by a store that sold Vibrams with a discount for soldiers, and then I just went and bought 2 pairs, and I never looked back. I actually wear them 24/7 or go completely barefoot every day. Wow. And I have no issues anymore walking at all.
And did you have a transition period?
No, I did not, because wearing normal shoes hurts.
Okay, yeah.
That's the thing. So actually, it was hurtful in the beginning, and I felt like I had delayed onset muscle soreness in my feet. I've never had that before, but I had that when I went to bed for the first couple of weeks. But I did not run them. I only walked for the first 2 months because I didn't want to get injured, and I thought, I did some of the training advice on Vibram's homepage that I think a lot of people should be doing and weren't doing when they were trying Vibrams out for the first time. They have a lot of training advice for your feet. I'm not saying everyone have to do them, but that helped me transition easier, I think, and I have no pains anymore. Only people looking at me weird on the street, of course.
Okay.
That's to be expected.
So I'm very curious about your arches. Were you able to regain strength, and do you have a normal arch now? You said they were kind of fallen before.
I've actually, you can see physical difference now, before and after pictures, but it is still a process. I think Roy McClanahan, who's been on your show as well, the podiatrist, he's talking about 3, 4, 5 years perhaps before that necessarily is fixed, because I had diagnosed fallen arches chronically on both feet actually, and was told I would never recover. So I think it's a work in progress. Your injuries with running, are they all completely gone now that you've changed?
Yeah, I'm sure I know that you can still get injured while running in Vibrams, but for me, it just gives me so much more feedback. For example, if I go out for a hard, maybe 15-mile run, and I push my body harder than I maybe intended to, the bottoms of my feet the next day might be slightly sore, a little bit tender, and that's feedback telling me, hey, you went a little bit too hard, so for the next couple of days you really need to take it easy. And if I was wearing a cushioned shoe, I wouldn't get that same kind of feedback from my feet. My feet wouldn't be tender, and so my body, there wouldn't be that feedback loop telling me, hey, you need to take this a little bit easier. And so that's been a huge part of it, is with the minimalist training, is getting as much feedback from your body as you can. So really listening to it. If you've got soreness in your feet or legs, I'd suggest to really listen to your body. And that's been a big part of it for me, is that a lot of times my body's saying, slow down, take it easy. But then other times, after I've had a few days of rest, I'm just really ready to go for it again. And so that's one way that it helps keep me motivated, is by being able to listen to my body and take a few days rest if I need it.
Yeah, you were a runner, and what I experienced sometimes, actually, just today I experienced it. What I hear a lot with people who aren't training a lot, especially, the thing is, boys usually play soccer here, at least, and in a lot of Europe, as small, so they are used to running. But a lot of girls, sadly, just aren't used to running when they're kids. And when I'm trying to get a friend or someone I'm working with the company to try to run, I hear from a lot of girls, I'm not made for running, or I don't run. And I'm like, that's what you're made for. How, like, what? So how do we motivate these people to start running?
I'm not sure about that, because you're right. Some people just don't like running. I'm not sure. I don't know what it is, because for me, it's such a primal, instinctive thing to do. The feedback loop I get, those chemicals that get produced in your brain when you start running, are pretty amazing. But I'm beginning to think that perhaps walking might be equally beneficial. Lately, I've been doing a lot of walking. I have a 5-month-old daughter, and I'll put her in my little sling, and we'll go out for a mile or two walk, and we'll do that a couple times a day. So maybe starting people with walking might be beneficial. I'm not sure. But that idea that you brought up, that this is what we're made for, I found that so fascinating, and I hadn't heard that until I read Born to Run. And that just made so much sense. And along with the paleo diet, if we were hunting down antelope by chasing them down in the midday sun, is basically how we caught our meat millions of years ago. Well, they didn't have sugary goo packets to take every 20 or 30 minutes. And so there's that idea that Tim Noakes is bringing up, that there's something evolutionarily based about us being able to burn more fat and not having to stuff our faces with sugary products every half hour or an hour. And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, the research is still waiting to bear it out, whether a high-fat diet can be just as beneficial. But I think that as more research comes out, we'll see that it might be possible, because the research that's out there so far, there's only about 11 studies, and most of them are showing either a slight benefit or no benefit at all, meaning no difference. So, but even though there's no difference as far as speed, there might be other benefits. You might not have to take the Gatorade when you're running a marathon. If you're out on a 4-hour training run, you might not have to pack extra food, because all the food is already on your body in the form of fat, all that you need. So that idea of that we evolved as persistence hunters is really fascinating to me.
I completely agree, and there's luckily a lot of good authors writing books that can really get you going while you're reading them. If on that topic, if you had to recommend one book, and I know you've had a lot of nice people on your show, so you're allowed to not go for one, but if you were to go for one, which one would you recommend to people if they're new to this, especially?
Okay. My number one book would definitely be Tim Noakes' Challenging Beliefs, because in there he has about he has, I think, probably 8 different chapters, but 3 or 4 of them deal with some of the things that he's been studying over his lifetime. And a lot of them have to do with what we've been talking about here. Things like a paleo-style diet, a higher fat diet, whether you need to drink as much as tolerable while you're running, or whether you can just listen to your thirst. He's taken on that issue. He's also taken on the minimalist running shoes. He's come around on that. He used to be a proponent. Well, he wasn't exactly sure what was the best shoe, but now he's coming more towards the minimalism. And Tim's writing is just the most creative and interesting writing that I've read. He's very open to new ideas, and yet he's very careful not to get behind a new idea unless there's good science to back it up. And so he's a medical doctor, but he's also an exercise and sports physiologist. And so he actually does the science himself, but then he also writes about it for the general public for us to read. So Challenging Beliefs by Tim Noakes would be my number one.
I'll put a link up so people can find it. And maybe buy it even. Buying books is sadly not something so many people do anymore, but let's recommend them to do that at least.
And are you familiar with that book by chance?
I haven't actually read it, but I'm certainly going to. I've watched all the or listened to all the podcasts with Tim Noakes. He's quite a personality. Yeah.
Exactly.
But I'm going to read that. He wrote a Waterlogged, I think it was his first book, right?
His first book that I know of is Lore of Running, which is about 1,000-page book on running, and it still has a ton of good information. But that was put out. The last edition was around 2000, and then he's got Waterlogged, which basically deals with hydration. And so that's also a very interesting book. He goes through the whole history of persistence hunting and how we evolved as distance runners to be able to conserve water. And we can listen to our thirst is basically what he points out. And then his latest book, he's got Challenging Beliefs, which is very good. And his latest book is Real Meals Revolution, which he's got a lot of recipes in there, I'm told. I haven't been able to get that book because it's not available in the U.S. yet.
Do you, going back to a question you've asked a lot of your guests, do you involve dairy in your diet?
When I first switched to a paleo diet, I didn't involve dairy. But I've been coming around on that, and I started adding it back into my diet just to test out if I could handle it. I had seen a lot of improvements by taking it out, but dairy is so delicious to me, and it also has a lot of great nutrients in it, like calcium. So, and unless you're eating a ton of vegetables, like cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, those have great sources of calcium. But unless you're eating about 3 servings of those a day, you're not getting a lot of calcium on a paleo diet. So you need to either consider adding some dairy in the form of milk or kefir or something like that, or yogurt. Or you could also try making a bone broth, which I hadn't heard of until this past year. But basically, you put some bones in a pot and cook it for several hours, and some of the calcium leaches out into the water, and you can make a soup or something with that. But dairy has been an interesting experiment for me to add back in, because for a long time I thought I was lactose intolerant. But I had heard that by adding fermented cultures like yogurt or kefir back into your diet, you could actually get some of those beneficial bacteria in your gut, and that would help you break down the lactose. And I was very surprised that actually worked. So I started by adding kefir, which is a fermented drink. It's similar to yogurt, but it's very tasty. And then I added some yogurt, and then I finally I tried some milk, and I was able to drink that without any problems. So that was really interesting to me.
Yeah, Denmark is a big net exporter of dairy, so we're happy to hear that.
Okay, great.
I've heard a lot of people refer to this as paleo 2.0.
Yeah.
Having added dairy, and there's a lot of discussions about genes for breaking down lactose and how that's big here in Northern Europe and stuff. Sometimes I think it's a sales trick, perhaps, to allow dairy as well. But
it could be. Have you had any experience with dairy? Is it better for you with or without?
I honestly have to say, and this might be a bit of a bit of an unfaithful what would you say, thing to say. But the thing is, paleo or not paleo, I am apparently very resistant to the stuff I eat. I think you had a guest on your show talking about insulin resistance and these things, and basically the difference for me is longer energy and I don't get hungry as much, but I don't see that huge of an improvement. Perhaps because I don't do running on the level you do, for example. But in everyday like mood swings and stuff like that, I don't see the same effects on my own body or mood. But what I do feel is a lot better, and I'm confident about it, and I also trust the science behind it, I suppose.
So you trust the science behind taking out dairy, or how does that work?
No, I mean I trust the science behind paleo generally. Okay. And in terms of dairy, I like coffee, and milk in your coffee is pretty nice. Yeah. But no, basically I have tested like weeks without and with dairy. Okay. And I don't see any difference in it. But I have a close workout buddy that actually dairy can really be a problem for him. So I think it's a lot, as you said yourself, it's a lot of personal experience, also because we're all different in these cases, especially with lactose and gluten, I'm thinking.
Yes. Yeah, there's one other compound that some people can have trouble with in dairy, and that's called the protein called casein. And that's the main protein in milk, and things like fermenting dairy, like yogurt or kefir, can help break down that, but even then, some people can still have problems with that. So it's more than just lactose, there's also that protein, but that's less common. And even if you have that problem, you can still eat things like butter or ghee, which are great sources of fat.
In regards to, now you mentioned casein, that leads me to, I just discussed protein powder with someone today actually, and casein was mentioned there as well, and why that might be bad, but also generally supplements and dietary supplements, especially people who go completely paleo tend to gravitate towards that not being a good idea. What's your stance and thinking regarding to supplements?
Yeah, for a long time that was my thinking. If our ancestors hadn't supplements, why should we need supplements? Can't we just get it all from our food? That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And a lot of times you'll see supplements where there's a lot of enthusiasm at the beginning, but then a few years later you see where there's actually some harmful side effects. That was the case with fish oil a few years back. People were really enthusiastic about it, but a few studies were finding that it could actually have detrimental effects on your heart. So for supplements now, I follow Paul Jaminet's recommendations, which his website is perfecthealthdiet.com. And him and his wife are both scientists, and they're super smart people, and they go through each nutrient and they tell you whether it's beneficial or whether it isn't. They go through all the research on it, and they base a lot of their thinking on Paleolithic diets and what they had back then and what we don't have now. So for example, paleo style diets are pretty high in magnesium because they're getting their water from a creek or a brook or something like that. But nowadays our water is filtered and we don't have the minerals in it anymore, so we're not getting the magnesium that we used to get. And so he says, okay, so that might be one area of supplementation that could be helpful. Then he goes and he looks at the research. Is there any harm that comes from supplementing with magnesium? Yes or no? And he finds there's no harm from magnesium, and he recommends an appropriate level that we probably would have gotten during the Paleolithic era. So his approach is really interesting to me. He starts with the evolutionary approach, and then he looks at the science. And there's about, I'd say, probably 10 or 12 supplements or vitamins that he recommends. There's about 4 that you take on a daily basis, like vitamin D, magnesium, and a couple other ones. I can't remember now. I think it's copper and something else. And because copper was also in our water supply. Oh, but if you're eating liver, you're going to get plenty of copper, so that's one thing to mention. But and then there's a couple of supplements that he recommends taking on a weekly basis. So it's kind of that minimalist approach, not taking too much, but just the right amount, and also comparing it to what our ancestors probably would have gotten from their diet.
And he was on your podcast, and people could go find his the Perfect Health Diet episode on your podcast at paleorunner.org and get to know it before they buy the book or go to the website of his. Yeah,
and it's one of those things that you really need to check out and see how you feel. As far as supplements, for me, like I said, I was a skeptical at first, but I've noticed that I've been taking them now for about 6 months, and since I started taking them, I actually do feel like I have a little bit more energy. That's something that I noticed at first. I can't say for sure it's because of that. It could just be a placebo effect, but for me, I do seem to feel better, so I think there might be something going on there.
If nothing else, the placebo that you have more energy is still worth it. As I see it.
And they don't appear to be doing any harm at this point, so I think I'll stick with it.
I think that's the sound thing to go by sometimes when there's only, as you call it in the strength community, bro science to go by if that's it.
Right.
If you look at what do you have with the motivation and going back to that? There's two kind of runners to an extent. If you don't go Olympic style, that quality, you have a lot of joggers, everyday runners who don't run for a specific speed. They don't necessarily use heart rate monitors and stuff like that. Then you have intermediate runners, which is a bigger group of people, obviously, with where I might probably be in the lowest part of that, and you're probably in the higher part. But the different kind of training these people should be doing, is there actually a difference, or
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there is a difference because the people at the elite level, they really can't afford to make a lot of changes in their training if it's working for them. So someone like an elite Kenyan, who's already has run some really fast times, what would be the point of them making any modifications to their diet or training because it's already working? But for people at the lower end, like you and I, we have the fun and ability to experiment with different things and see how we feel, because we're not going to lose millions of dollars in endorsements if we have a bad race here or there. So for me, I can try the paleo diet and see, do I run faster or do I run slower? How do I feel? And there's really not too much of a downside, because I can always go back to eating lots of grains, or I can try the minimalist training approach and only run 25 miles a week, which is a few miles a day, and see how that works. And there's really no downside, because I can always go back to running 50 or 60 miles a week, and so I think there is a big difference between the elites and how we train. And also I train to have the most fun. So a big part of my training is time trials. I love testing my body, especially when I'm feeling very motivated. And so I'll go out and I'll run a 10K or a half marathon just on my own with my GPS watch and just see how fast I can run that day. And that's just a lot of fun for me. Whereas the elite athletes, they probably have to stick to more of a rigorous schedule where they might have a specific workout that their coach has planned out for them. Whereas for us, who there's not as much at stake, I'd recommend just training in a way that makes your body feel good and that brings you the most joy. So that's kind of the difference that I see.
The last two things I'd like to ask you about is first of all free fuel. And the reason I'd like to ask you about that is actually because every time you see someone doing advertisement for a product, you're thinking, what are they getting out of it and all that? Yep. So actually, I'd like you to explain that for us, exactly what it's about and why it's not just a scam like so many other, especially in the strength lifting community. It's a pretty big thing that big stars even are promoting products that are basically a complete hoax, and we've seen world champions actually been revealed doing that. I'm not saying free fuel is a hoax, but you're getting a chance to explain that. So first that, and then I have one other thing.
Yeah, well, Free Fuel is a product that I learned about through having a guest on my show, and in 2012 I did 4 marathons, and I was looking for a way to fuel my body better. As far as I had moved to this paleo style diet, but during the marathon and during training I was still taking sugar, and basically in the form of Gatorade, and a lot of times that would seem to upset my stomach. I'm not sure why, but I would seem to get some of that gas and things again. So I started I was wondering, could I just not take anything, just water? And I wasn't sure if I could do that, but I heard about this product called Free Fuel from one of my guests, and I gave it a shot, and it just seemed to work for me. It was gentle on my stomach, and it seemed more in line with the paleo diet because it has things like whey protein from grass-fed cows. It also has coconut milk, and then it has a little bit of starch to help store your liver glucose supplies. So for me, that's what I use for training, and it seems to work better for me. It's gentler on my stomach, and it seems to give me all the energy I need. So I just kind of became a proponent about it, and then they ended up sponsoring my podcast. So that's just kind of been my experience with it.
Yeah, okay. The last thing is you mentioned GPS and for that matter heart rate and stuff like that. And there's in some communities at least a pretty big discussion about what's accurate enough and what's precise enough, and the difference between that and whatnot. What would you recommend?
I think GPS is actually fairly accurate, and I do several half marathons, 5Ks, 10Ks a year, and my distance is almost 99% accurate within the measured distance of the course. So Garmin, which is probably the biggest maker of GPS watches, has come out with a new watch called the Garmin 620 and the 220, and my wife and I upgraded to those, and there's been a lot of comments online saying that those aren't very accurate. There's actually one that's a lot cheaper called the Garmin 310, and that's only around $150 on Amazon, and that's actually very accurate as far as a lot of people have used it, and it's pretty accurate. But now, if you're going to do something like quarter-mile intervals, I've found that it's not accurate over short distances. So I'm not sure why that is. It has something to do with GPS and the way it draws lines on a two-dimensional map versus a three-dimensional reality of the world that we're living in. So I'm not sure why, but if you're trying to use it for short distances, it's not as accurate. But once you start to average out the distances over, say, a 5K, it seems to become more and more accurate. And as far as heart rate, I don't really trust heart rate, because during the winter, my heart rate is a lot lower, and then as it starts to get hotter, like it is here now, and more humid, my heart rate goes way up, even though I'm doing the same pace. So that's something that I just kind of use every once in a while for fun, just to check in and see what I'm doing, but I don't trust heart rate very much.
You train by time, not
Yes.
pulse. Yeah.
I train by time and by pace. I try to compare my paces, yep.
Aaron, I'd like to once again thank you very much for appearing on the show, and recommend everyone to check out your blog and thereby podcast. It's paleorunner.org.
Yes, yep.
That you go to, and you can also find you. I found you on Pocket Cast on Android, for example, and you're also on iTunes podcast library and all that. If I understand.
Yeah, it was great talking with you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, it's our honor as our first guest to have someone like you on our show. Thank you.
Thank you so much.